Cost of living in Malaysia has been increasing by the day. Cost of living is defined as the amount of money needed to cover basic expenses in day-to-day life. These expenses include housing, food, and taxes, and other basic necessities. The main reason for an increase of cost of living is inflation. Inflation is when the purchasing power of a currency decreases and price in goods and services increase. When this happens, things in our daily life become more expensive and unaffordable. This can cause a decrease in a person's mental well-being because they feel more stressed and anxious about having to face higher costs. This can also pose a threat to a person's physical well-being as they are unable to afford a hygienic and comfortable lifestyle, and living in an unhygienic lifestyle increases the risk of contracting diseases. Moreover, the rising cost of living increases the poverty rates in the country as well.
Hence, in this video, we will address the rising cost of living in Malaysia with three objectives. Firstly, we aim to raise awareness and help the public understand the reason behind the rising cost of living in Malaysia. Secondly, is to study the effect of rising cost of living in Malaysia on mental health of Malaysians from different income groups. And lastly, is to study the impact of rising cost of living in Malaysia on Malaysian living habits. In our video, we will also include some solutions to help Malaysians tackle these rising costs.
For our research methodology, we have decided to carry out an online survey using Google Form, as Google Form is more convenient and easily accessible. Besides that, Google Form is much cost-effective and efficient in data collection. Next, we have included various questions in our survey in order to study more about our respondents' understanding on our topic, the rising cost of living in Malaysia, and how they manage to deal with these rising costs. Next, our research aims to study the impact of rising cost of living in Malaysia, such as the rising cost of housing, transport, food, and energy on our respondents' mental health and well-being.
For our survey, we have collected responses from 120 respondents in total. Amongst the 120 respondents, 50% were female, 48.3% were male, and 1.7% preferred not to disclose their gender. 83.3% were Chinese, 10.8% were Malay, 2.5% were Indians, and 3.4% were others. We also ensured that data collected for our research is from different age groups, different income groups, as seen above here.
As analyzed, majority of respondents were 18 to 34 years old, but we also have 1.7% of our respondents were below 18, 9.2% were 25 to 34 years old, 5.8% were 35 to 44 years old, 32.5% being 45 to 54 years old, and finally 20.8% being 55 and above. As for our respondents' monthly income or allowance, majority were earning or receiving allowance of 1,000 ringgit and below a month. For 39.2% of our respondents had an income of 10,000 ringgit and above a month. Through this, we believe that we have collected responses that are equally distributed amongst the Malaysians with various backgrounds.
To achieve our first research objective, we decided to study the degree of awareness that our respondents had about the rising cost of living in Malaysia. And through our survey, it can be seen that most of our respondents have noticed is aware of the increased cost of housing, grocery, food, and energy bills within the past year. Hence, it can be said that our respondents are aware of the rising cost of living in Malaysia.
This brings us to our next objective, which is to see whether or not this increased cost of living has affected our respondents' mental health, and to see whether or not the degree of impact on the individual's mental health has anything to do with their monthly income or allowances. As seen in the pie chart shown here, 6.7% of our respondents' mental health were always impacted by the rising cost of living, whereas 14.2% of our respondents' mental health were very often impacted, 40% of our respondents' mental health were sometimes impacted, 24.2% of our respondents were rarely impacted, and 15% of our respondents' mental health were never impacted. This can be said that our respondents' mental health was more unlikely to be impacted by the rising cost of living in Malaysia. Further analysing these results, it can be concluded that people from lower income groups, such as those who are earning or receiving allowances below 1,000 ringgit, are more likely to have their mental health impacted by this rising cost of living as compared to those who are earning or receiving allowances above 10,000 ringgit. The reasoning behind these results can be justified by the philosophical perspective of logic, which is envisioned as a philosophical perspective that is based on valid inferences, logical truth, or logical reasonings. In simple words, the reason as to why people earning above 10,000 ringgit are not as impacted by these rising costs of living as compared to those who are earning below 1,000 ringgit is simply because those with high income can afford these rising costs of living. And when they can afford it, they don't have to worry about it. And when they're not worrying about it, their mental health will not be affected by it. This is the opposite for those who are earning below 1,000 ringgit, as they may be struggling to afford these rising costs of living. And when they're not able to afford it, they tend to worry or they get stressed out because of it. And when that happens, their mental health will be affected.
Lastly, we studied the impact of rising costs of living on our respondents' living habits. Through our analysis, we found that 40% of our respondents would cut back on meat, fresh food, vegetables, and other expensive items in order to tackle the rising cost of groceries. Whereas another 40% of our respondents will direct money from other areas of their budget to tackle the increased cost of groceries. There were also 32.5% of our respondents who would eat lesser or skip meals to handle these rising costs. As for energy bills, we found that 39.2% of our respondents would cut back on the use of air conditioning, 30.8% would cut back on the use of lights, 15.8% would reduce the use of electrical appliances while cooking, 9.2% would take shorter or fewer hot showers, and 6.7% of our respondents would decrease the time of having people over. This habit and coping mechanism can be justified with the philosophy of psychology, as this philosophical perspective often caters towards an individual's mind and how they express themselves through their behavior, and is often related to an individual's consciousness, perceptions, rationality, and even their emotions. The reason to why our respondents decided to cut down on buying or eating certain food or reducing the use of certain things in order to tackle the rising cost of grocery and energy bills is because they think that these things are cut down are not a prejudice necessary in their life, in a sense that they can live and survive without these things. All these actions has been categorized and justified under the philosophy because the unnecessity of these things are perceptions perceived by our respondents through their consciousness and even emotions.
And that concludes our findings and discussion.
So, how can Malaysians tackle this issue of rising cost of living? Well, both the governments and individuals themselves can play a part in overcoming this issue. For example, the government can subsidize businesses to encourage people to start up their own businesses and not be unemployed. When there's a presence of subsidies, businesses can produce more goods, which increase the supply of the product and lead to the lower price of the goods, and this may increase the demand for the product. Other than that, the government can provide proper access to food, basic essentials and help to households and families who are below the poverty line. By doing this, the daily expenses of poor families can be reduced and their living standards can be improved. Another way the government can help the nation tackle this issue is to ensure that Malaysians complete their education up till at least secondary school. This can greatly increase their job opportunities. According to UNESCO, if all students in low-income countries had just basic reading skills and nothing else, an estimate number of about 171 million people could escape extreme poverty. Hence, if all adults complete secondary education, we could cut the global poverty rate by more than half. Moreover, education also helps develop skills and abilities, corrects some of the imbalances that come out of marginalization, and decrease both the risk and vulnerability to poverty.
Besides that, here are some tips to help tackle the rising cost of living in the world. Some of the way that can reduce the cost of living is to set the budget for things like grocery shopping so that you won't spend too much and enough to survive. Cooking ourselves will be cheaper compared with eating outside. So from there, you can save some money. And for the individual that are driving to work, you can consider using public transport like bus or train, as it significantly reduces the cost of transport. Individuals that don't own a car will definitely spend lesser, as they don't need to pay the road tax, car maintenance, and so on. However, this does not mean owning a car is bad, but it's just a way to help reduce the cost of living. And the money that is saved up, you can place it in bank or put into investment like real estate.
In conclusion, the cost of living do vary from different people's background. Through our research, it's great that most Malaysians are aware of this rising cost of living and still able to cope with this increased cost. Our research also concluded that although most Malaysians' mental health are more unlikely to be impacted by these rising costs, the likeliness and impact of these rising costs on an individual's Malaysian mental health is still slowly increasing by the day, especially with the rising cost of living gradually increasing day by day. Therefore, we hope that this issue is addressed better by the government soon, and we also hope that our video has been informational to those watching and is able to help Malaysians in tackling these issues. With that, we'll end our video. Thank you so much for watching.